ahead and get started. This is a joint assembly health policy and public safety committee of the whole meeting. It is Friday, September 20th, and we are noticed from 1:30 to 3 p.m. Let's go ahead and start with introductions. Mr. Dunbar.
Forrest Dunbar.
Austin Nicholson.
Pete Peterson. Felix Herrera.
Suzanne LaFrance. And if we could get folks in the back of the room here to identify themselves as well.
Jeffrey Hickman, Health Department.
Natasha Pineda, Health Department.
Emily Neenan, American Cancer Society, Cancer Action Network.
Marge Dunking, American Lung Association.
Quincy Arms, MOA Legal.
Todd Sherwood, likewise.
Jake Warden, ACBA.
Austin Gettings, ACBA.
Jody Hector, Cambridge Park.
Mike Earl, Anchorage Police Department. Steve Dunn, Anchorage Police Department.
James Stinson in Whiteman, Alaska.
Steve Training. Sorry.
Katie Steffens, Breathe for Anchorage Coalition.
Heather Arono, American Cancer Society, Cancer Action Network.
John Redden, Great Northern Cannabis. Aaron Ralph, Alaska Cannabis Exchange, and Anchorage Cannabis Business Association.
Eugene Haven to represent myself.
Great, and we have a couple folks from the clerk's office, Andy Otis, clerk's office, this lovely clerk's office. Okay, great. Thank you all for being here. We'll go ahead and start by discussing the health aspects of the proposed ordinance. And actually, Ms. Pineda, if you want to come up, and anyone else.
Is there anywhere you want us from the room?
Wherever you're comfortable. Actually, before you begin, I did want to point out to members and other folks that last time when the edibles on-site consumption ordinance was up, we did ask the health department for an opinion, and the health department did issue one. And I don't know if you want to talk briefly to that.
Sure.
Before we move on. Or I have it right here. I can summarize.
Yeah, so we did identify it in kind of our concerns related to health aspects, but really because the industry is fairly new and there hasn't been a lot of research done, it's been an illegal drug prior to very recently, that we felt looking at the balance of evidence that there was not enough evidence for us to say one way or the other what the evidence told us. However, we did provide you guys with some basic information about how marijuana consumption has impacted our population, particularly youth. We have high rates of addiction in our state. Youth addiction to marijuana is highest. We're in the top in the country. It continues to be a concern. We also laid out some information about other health effects and some of the unknowns, that more information is coming out, and even between the time we did this one and our recent review, there's been more research and other laws passed in other states. So, you know, some of the facts have changed, but some of the states, Colorado recently passed a comprehensive on-site consumption law. And I think, you know, public health in general uses a precautionary principle as they approach public health issues. And so we wanted to share it from that perspective. And that's what's included in that one. But I don't think we got to discuss it. It might have gotten shared, but we didn't have a discussion about it with the body.
Thank you, Ms. Pineda. And I don't know how you, if you have something prepared you want to start with.
Yeah, we kind of worked off of the questions that you guys had generated. And we do have some links to send you afterwards, but I anticipated that with other people here in the audience and conversation and discussions, we'll most likely generate more questions. So that we'll go ahead and collect the feedback and then send you the resources and links based on how this conversation goes. So I could start with number one, if you want. Does everybody have these questions that were sent out? Like the ventilation and those?
Yeah, may I say something about that?
Ms. Pineda?
So these are just my random questions that I put together that I meant to be sort of some of the questions, but I think they've become the questions. So I would encourage people, this is in a little random brainstorm session I had with myself, so I would encourage people to bring other questions forward, including on the body or not, and just take these with a grain of salt. But I would just sort of try to get
And
things
there's
going.
probably, like, the lung association, and there's other people who might also have more in-depth answers than I
Yeah.
do that may be able to answer questions. as
And
well.
can I say, I think Carissa printed some of these out, but if everyone doesn't have
Oh,
them.
no, I have it here now.
Okay.
I just heard that they were circulated and I hadn't seen them. before.
I only circulated them to these guys and said, here are mine, check with the other co-chairs. And
Jeff,
I
do you
think
wanna
this
come
is
up
what
here?
ends up being helpful.
And Mr. Rivera, did you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had to double check with Barbara, but I believe we had asked that this list be sent out to the body to see if there were any other questions to be added to this dialogue, and I think that happened. I'd have to go back and check. But I think this is a good start, and then if we have any other questions, we can ask now.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera.
So largely when we reviewed the literature and added the smoking by inhalation or through to the on-site consumption review, we didn't find that much more information. We found a little bit. So we focused more on the questions and just kind of getting a better understanding of, how well ventilated rooms can be, what would recommended ventilation look like. Jeff can kind of share perspective from code enforcement officers that would be needed to go into those locations. In general, some legal review discussed some parts per person being supplied in the breathing zone for ventilation based on the International Mechanical Code, and we can provide that basic language of what may work, but a smoking lounge would require about 4 times the ventilation of a typical office space. And I think some partners that are in the audience could speak more about the ASHRAE national standards that are set. But in that body of literature, it does identify that there is no way to eliminate health harm via ventilation. But I am not an expert on that. I'm simply sharing that information with you. Talking about secondhand smoking effects, again, I think there's other partners in the room who can speak to it as well. But the CDC guidance on that basically communicates that eliminating smoke in indoor spaces fully protects non-smokers from exposure to secondhand smoke. Separating smokers from non-smokers, cleaning the air, and ventilating buildings cannot eliminate exposure of non-smokers to secondhand smoke. That's the standard literature around that question. And I don't know if you guys want to get feedback from anybody else on that issue.
Do any members have questions?
I guess I have a question, more for you, Madam Chair. We could have Natasha go through her opinion on each of these. We could talk about one holistically and have others weigh in if they have thoughts. I'd be interested in hearing from the industry about how they see ventilation going and what their plans are, and then of course from other folks who are interested in health impacts. So I don't know if that might be a good way to kind of tackle each question, but sort of up to what people find most useful.
That sounds good to me. So we'll have a response from AHD and see if other folks want to weigh in on the health side and then also industry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask a
Mr.
question?
Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm thinking about, the effects of secondhand smoke after it's already been scrubbed as much as possible. How much more negative effects could that have compared to what people get in their average home from dogs and cats and dust and smoke and that thing from cooking and additional things, chemicals that they're cleaning with and stuff? Did anyone from the health field have information about that?
Neenan and Ms. Stone King, if you'd like to respond to that question and then the other aspects of it.
Sure. Do you want me to?
Sure, come on up.
I actually brought with me, for the record, Emily Neenan, American Cancer Society, Cancer Action Network, and Marge may have some things to add here, but I did actually bring with me some copies of a Centers for Disease Control letter of evidence that was given to the state legislature during the smoke-free workplaces effort on the health effects of secondhand smoke at a vote. I was just checking to see if this is the one that addresses the ventilation issue as well. additional copies of that. And I'm happy to submit that electronically, but specifically talking about the health effects of marijuana and secondhand smoke. This is a couple years old, so there's more data since then. Through the chair to Assemblymember Peterson's question about the comparison to other health harms, there's a large body of evidence on the dangers of secondhand smoke. Secondhand smoke does kill. That evidence is clear, and there isn't a ventilation system that exists that can fully remove the health harms from secondhand smoke. So one of the challenges is the ultrafine particles and the carcinogens that are in the smoke. A good system may be able to eliminate smell and eliminate visible smoke. When the Marijuana Control Board was setting the regulations, the reason that the regulations talk about smell and visible smoke ventilation system to remove visible smoke is because the Marijuana Control Board also had the evidence from the Surgeon General in front of them that you can't remove the health harms. So that was in an earlier draft of the regulations. They took that out because they knew that was not an achievable goal. Mr. Constance?
So what was the answer to the question, though? The question was, compared to other toxins that are generally present in your environment, or in some environments that might be more or less clean than others, what are the comparative risks to your perception of secondhand cannabis smoke and other potential pollutants? That was the question.
I'll take that one. So you've heard the comparison to secondhand cigarette smoke. The other comparison to make is to wildfire smoke, which we all saw, breathed, and experienced this summer. From the perspective of particle pollution, of fine particles, smoke is smoke. So the chemical constituents of that may differ from product to source, but particle pollution is particle pollution, and that is known worldwide through volumes of scientific evidence as a killer. It raises premature death from respiratory and cardiac causes. It increases the number of heart attacks. It causes inflammation of lung tissue in young, healthy adults. Increased hospitalizations for cardiovascular disease, including strokes and congestive heart failure, and increased emergency room visits for respiratory ailments. So those are well documented, well categorized. So if you want to argue that secondhand marijuana smoke is not cigarette smoke, that's one thing, but that is the best comparison. But wildfire smoke or any particle pollution holds that same, and those risks that I read are considered risks for short-term exposure. The most recent, not the most recent, but one of the most compelling facts is around the heart disease risk and raising your risk for heart attacks happens within 20 minutes of exposure. And that came out from the Heart Association at least 5 years ago now.
Mr. Dunbar, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, just about this document that did you just provided this, right? It has some highlighted here, and it says there's no risk-free level of secondhand tobacco smoke exposure. Separating smokers and non-smokers doesn't work. The back, clean air, free from smoke from any source remains the same to protect health. So, given this document, would you recommend that we ban cigarette smoke outdoors, tobacco smoking outdoors in Anchorage?
So this is referring to indoor spaces.
That's not how I read this. They say any level of secondhand tobacco smoke exposure. I mean, that's what it says here.
It's based on the Surgeon General's report on secondhand smoke, which is in reference to indoor use.
So, okay. So outdoor use, not a risk.
Go ahead.
If I may. You can still have risk outdoors, absolutely. Your risk is does vary. It's a whole lot easier to measure the risk in an enclosed space. Anybody who's been standing next to somebody smoking outside has certainly experienced that. The reason that we have focused on indoor smoking and getting protecting workers inside the workplace is because that's where we know the greatest health harms exist. That's where we have the evidence.
So your organization would not recommend banning tobacco smoke outside?
That is not.
He has no position on that, yeah.
Would you support marijuana smoke outside?
We wouldn't take a position as an organization on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Costa?
Yeah, that's interesting. So if the on-site consumption spaces were outdoors, that wouldn't be a concern for you?
Well, we wouldn't support it, but we wouldn't take a position on it.
Right, you wouldn't be out
Yeah.
here championing it. So
You
going back
know,
to the previous
with-
question, I understand you gotta
With the
reach-
distance from the door and the building.
Yeah, of course, generally speaking. That's interesting. Should we then be considering banning candles in restaurants? Candles are flames inside of indoor spaces, or anywhere really where people have candles that are commercial spaces, churches. And there are a number of places that use flaming products as part of their business. Go to the Captain Cook Hotel, Cafe Diablo, flaming alcohol, and cinnamon burning into the air. Should we be making a list of all of these flammable indoor items because there's no level of indoor smoke that can be non-toxic?
To the chair, no. They're based on the evidence that we have from the Surgeon General's report on secondhand smoke. The risks are much greater around secondhand smoke than you're going to get anything from a candle. It's not on scale, not a comparison.
But none. It says none, no level.
No, I'm sorry.
There's no level of smoke that you could create a place that would be safe.
This is specifically referring to secondhand tobacco smoke, and by extension, you have to take one step further to go into the American Society for Heating and Refrigeration Engineers ASHRAE standard-setting body is including marijuana smoke in their definition of secondhand tobacco smoke. And just to add on, there was a lot of discussion about these sorts of things during the statewide smoke-free workplace law, and it's helpful to hear some of the questions because this isn't an education opportunity we've had a chance to do with this body in a good decade. So we'd be happy to provide more information on those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so you mentioned, someone mentioned the smoke that we were all breathing this summer from the fire in Kenai. And I'm wondering, there are different sizes of particles, because I know Fairbanks has air problems and gets in trouble out there sometimes because they have a lot of wood burning heating devices that are used, so they have a lot of wood smoke in the air out there. So when we have particles coming from that smoke, aren't there large particles and small particles as well?
Good question. So the particles in smoke, the size is PM 2.5, particulate matter 2.5 micrograms per cubic meter, which is, PM 10 is the coarser. That would be something that you can see visibly without a large density, such as dust. That's coarse particulates. That's about a tenth of the diameter of the human hair. PM 2.5 is a tenth of that, and problem being the smaller it is, gets lodged deeper in your lungs, and that's what's measured in both Fairbanks around their wood burning issue in the winter, air pollution, and around wildfire smoke in the summer here and there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. For the record, we have been joined by Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm just trying to get kind of to the heart of your concerns, and is it really about the employee who might be exposed to secondhand smoke? Because everyone else would be voluntarily going into the room.
It's both. Certainly the employee's exposure is longer, and that raises the risk. And so that's why in smoke-free campaigns and such, we focus on it as a workplace issue, because the employee's exposed for longer periods of time. But these policies are designed to protect both the public and the worker.
Can I follow up? You said it's both, so you're wanting to protect those who are knowingly going in to engage in an activity that they're consenting to do? I mean, I guess I'm getting stuck in a bit of a loop where it seems that you want to prohibit people from doing something that may be allowed to be done. And I have some reservations about that versus someone who may just have to be there by a circumstance of work. So I'd really like you to flesh that out for me.
Sure. So I think I've heard the arguments about needing a place for people to use a legal product, whether they be tourists or whether they be renters. I think you have done that now with edibles. And that somebody has a preference for smoking or vaping over edibles shouldn't be a preference that should be raised above putting everyone else at risk. So there may be people who go for just edibles who don't want secondhand smoke.
One more quick. Okay. So you wouldn't have the same objection that you just stated if there were edible-only consumption areas and smoking-only consumption areas?
We would, because of the workers.
Setting that issue aside, I really want to set the worker aside. I'm understanding your concern there. I'm clear there, okay? It's the second set of folks. I want to make sure I'm really clear on your position. If it's smoking only, there's no one consuming edibles in that room, and everyone is consented to go into that room, and it's legal to do so, why are you still concerned?
So think back 25 years ago when everybody said secondhand smoke from cigarettes was not an issue. And then the science came out, and then the body count came out. So our job as health advocates is to take the best science that's out there and use it to advocate for the highest level of, or the most feasible level of protection for everybody's lungs.
Okay. Elizabeth Davidson and then Mr. Johnston.
Yeah, I, from the Community and Economic Development Committee meeting, I wasn't there, but I listened to it afterward, and there was some discussion about employees and whether employees are allowed to go into these rooms, because I tend to agree with Meg. I'm less concerned about people willingly going to, if they're going to smoke marijuana or be around people who are smoking marijuana, they might be doing that in many places. So to me, I'm less concerned about that. But I think the employee thing is makes sense. But my understanding is that the way it's crafted, or it might be in S version, is that employees are not allowed to go into this room unless it's an emergency. I did remember hearing from Jana Weltzine that was potentially problematic, and so I just want to talk about where we are on that, and maybe the sponsors can speak to where they are on the language. Is it you and Chris who are sponsoring, or just you?
Yeah, from the last, it's been a while, was it a work session?
Yeah.
There were a number of suggestions that I took as amendments I gave to Dean. Unfortunately, Dean is experiencing the last week of moose hunting season right now, so we can't speak to how far the language is along. I remember that one of the things was about posting signs. I think something Mr. Perez-Rodilla had suggested. And I think you're right that we had discussed, but I don't think we yet have a language around, the relationship of the employee to the physical space. I always envisioned, I think as you did too, that the employee would be on the outside, that it would be either glass or a video tool, and they would give the individual their product and they would go in there and use it. Now, Ms. Weltzine raised some scenarios where maybe that wasn't practical, and there are people from the industry here, maybe they could speak to how they want to design the physical space. I mean, is there anyone here from the industry who is contemplating this or can speak to whether or not the employees need to be physically in the room with the folks smoking or can remain separated from them?
And then please come up if you do want to speak.
And can I just add to that while they're coming up? This is Austin again. But how can we, even if I theoretically support the idea of their employees not being in there except for under an emergency, how can we require that? Because if people are, they're having a soda or they're doing whatever they're doing and they're smoking some pot and they're hanging out and then they leave and then there's like, it's messy and then how would you even keep employees out of there? Is it like self-cleaning, or I guess I just don't understand the practicality
I
of
think
that.
I think the language says they can't be in there while it's being smoked.
But
after
theoretically,
they're
someone
done-
would always be, you know what I mean? If it's a room environment where there's a bunch of people doing different things, how could you even clean up? And
Yeah, I guess you might
Anyway,
want to
maybe John
close it
wants
for
to
a
talk
time.
to that,
Yeah.
but-
I mean, I don't know.
And would you state your name for the
Sorry,
record?
John Redden. I'm with Great Northern Cannabis, also a member of the ACBA. I'm not sure I'm aware of any of the licensees that are currently designing a facility in order to meet requirements, because we don't know what those are going to be. So that's really difficult from a business standpoint to prepare for something that we don't really know how to accommodate. To answer your question, I mean, it seems like there may be some sort of required sort of self-cleaning, or sort of, I mean, maybe the people who are going to use this lounge or whatnot participate at some level and sort of like help keep the place tidy in order to keep employees out of that envelope or that room during the portion of time where there would be smoke. But I mean, it seems like deciding right now whether or not that's feasible, it seems kind of putting the cart before the horse. If we could have, I mean, sort of like, let's make the rules, and then we can design our business model to accommodate sort of those sorts of requirements. I did have a question going back to your all's comments about, is this the report, the ASHRAE report that you all were talking about? The ASHRAE position document on environmental tobacco smoke?
I can't say without looking at the detail, but go ahead.
Okay, the only thing I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to, and I'm happy to circulate the version of their report that I have here, but it was approved in October 22, 2010, and is current until June 26, 2020. But one of the main things, or one of the options for design and operational approaches that they mention in here, well, they identify four. One is banning smoking altogether. The second one is smoking only in isolated rooms where the smokers and non-smokers would be separated. The third would be smoking in separate but not isolated spaces. And then there's mixed occupancy of smokers and non-smokers, which I think we can all agree that's probably not going to work in our current circumstance. But the smoking only in isolated rooms approach, which they discuss, they mentioned that secondhand smoke and the exposure to secondhand smoke and the negative health impacts of that secondhand smoke could be alleviated and could be isolated, such that the only people who were being negatively impacted by the secondhand smoke were the persons that were in the room itself where the smoking was occurring. And so I think when we say that by using a designed HVAC system to change pressure and control air intake and to seal an envelope of a room, we can't 100% remove all detrimental health effects for all people. That's true, because we're also including the people that are in there smoking. So they, of course, are going to be being affected by this smoke that's in the air in the room, which they're holding occupancy. But anyway.
So my name is Jane Stinson.
Actually, if I could just pause you a moment, I apologize. Mr. Constant was in the queue and actually had a question on the previous
Yeah, for a previous
question.
topic that we were on, and we're quickly running away from that, but the Stone King mentioned that 25 years ago, no one believed that there were harms from secondhand smoke, and then body count started piling up. And I don't disagree with that. But what didn't happen 25 years ago to today is any demonstration of the body counts from the use of marijuana smoke. That does not exist. There's no record of it. It isn't the same. And so I would love for somebody to introduce demonstrate a record of a body count from secondhand smoke limited to marijuana since. Because if we're going to bring up the hobgoblin of body counts, I want to see data, right? Because I will concede to the fact that tobacco does have a proven effect. That's true. But when we switch to the cognate, the smoking hasn't increased exponentially since then of cannabis. Might have some marginally, but those people have always been here. Those people will always be here. Where's the body count?
Mr. Thompson, do you want Ms. Jones?
Yeah, please. I mean, I would like the data, of course, but I would love for the extemporaneous.
My response to Ms. Zelatel's theoretical question was exactly that point, is that we don't have the data currently. In the future, we will. The reason we don't have the data is because there has been, there still is no legal place to study smoking cannabis and its effect on people. And so it's hard enough to document secondhand smoke exposure versus direct smoking, for instance, of anything. But to not have a legal space to do it in with because of the federal illegal product. That's why we don't have a documented body count. But that was exactly the point, was we don't know what we don't know now.
If I might though.
And the principle of precautionary principle that Ms. Pineda mentioned earlier in public health.
Yeah, the precautionary principle is so interesting. I've been hearing a lot about that in relationship to 5G. And so I hope the health department's preparing to ramp up their precautionary principle analysis, because there's a whole slew of people that are afraid radio waves are frying their brains. And so, it's similar but interesting how we would implement our approach to the precautionary principle only as it relates to things that we tend to prohibit or have prohibited. I would just come back to the notion, though, not that we haven't studied it, but when we have body counts, we study where those body counts come from. Right? That doesn't matter. Right? We know what's causing the death from lung disease or cancer, or we study that ongoing, right? So that information actually doesn't need to wait. Testing on rats or testing on human cases going forward to establish that kind of science does. But you would guess, I would guess, that if that statistical analysis of all the deaths compounding have existed, we would have some evidence to that effect.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. And I just want to point out, we're not going to debate 5G here.
No, but just put it on the table, like a precautionary principle. If we're going to use it, let's use it generally, but not just on the things we intend to prohibit.
So we've been joined by Mr. Weddleton, and I apologize, ma'am, for interrupting your introduction. I know Ms. Quinn Davidson has some questions.
I had a quick question for Don, just to follow up of what he presented. So that's interesting, that sort of how you can set up the regulations to reach different goals. Do you think among members of the industry there's a preference? I mean, would you want, I assume you wouldn't want a room where people just smoke, people just eat edibles. I mean, that's more work and money to create different spaces. But I hear you saying that limits the impacts because people are separated, smokers and non-smokers. Like, what do you think about that? And and you could answer it too, and others, and I don't, I know it's hard for all of you to answer for everyone because you're in different positions, but I'm just sort of curious what you all think about that.
My name is Jane Stinson. I live in Lighton, Alaska, and John and I represent the industry, and we both are members of ACBA. And just a couple of comments along those lines is, if you can envision, I've seen this in San Francisco. I've seen a place that actually takes care of, that allows people to come in and smoke and eat and experience marijuana. And the way they work it is, you come in and there's an ID checker, and you go into a room, get what you want, but there is an area that's, if you can imagine a long time ago, those booths where they have machines where you could pick music from, what do you call those? Jukebox.
Oh.
Those were huge. That's
Sorry.
my time.
No, we have to know about jukeboxes.
Yeah.
I thought it was something far more
Absolutely.
obscure.
This place was designed so that there was a big room where people could smoke, inhale, and they had these these boxes. They were very nice. You could order there. You could go order what you wanted and go and pick up what you asked for and bring it back. But the essence of this box was an HVAC system that just sucked the air that you had around your table or around a bigger table. There would be a big center HVAC system that would just suck the air, and then it would just, come out of your mouth and just go right there. It wouldn't go anywhere else. There was also a place where people could dab. So that's kind of a different scenario, smoking flower and doing all the concentrates are two different things. So if you wanted to do that, because there's lots of different ways to experience that, you go into a different room. They actually had it set up so that you could go to an area where you could do that. Everyone can eat edibles and coffee. They had all sorts of extra things that would allow a really nice social situation. But the HVAC was heavy duty and set up. So I hope that helps a little bit, just to give you an idea of what a functioning one is like right now.
And then a question from Mr. Constant.
And we aren't going to be allowing those dabs in Alaska, right? The state has restricted the use of concentrates in any public setting, right?
Correct. Okay, can I ask a follow-up? Thank you, Madam Chair. So in that room you're describing in San Francisco, were there employees in that?
The employees were not in there. The people would go up and get what they wanted and take it back.
Okay.
And basically police there.
So how did they, to follow up Ms. Quinn-Davidson's question, how did the store keep that place sort of clean? Or, if there were no employees in there, how did they sort of regulate the space?
I'm not sure about that. Yeah, I don't know about those details, but we could find out.
They have pretty clear regs. San Francisco has pretty clear local regulations that are pretty detailed.
So they do have on-site consumption in San Francisco?
Yeah, there's like 9 cities in California.
Oh, I was under the impression Alaska was the first.
Ms. Quinn-Davidson, do you have a question?
I did. Not forgetting it. Come back.
Okay. Actually, Ms. Pineda, would you want to comment on San Francisco or any of the
we reviewed all the literature, so we're looking at everything. I know Colorado had their full state law passed in June. I haven't looked at any local implementation of those. We're looking at it not only from the health aspect, but also code enforcement and what would our role be and what would our employees be asked to do and how would they do that work. And so we looked, I don't think Jeff had a chance to look at them, but I started pulling the California local laws to start looking at them. I didn't go into them in depth. They weren't really a part of something we were looking at, but they do have detailed. They've been doing it for a few, not very long. It's fairly new. And Colorado's hasn't completely implemented it everywhere yet.
Ms. Quinn-Davidson?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So though in Ms. Pineda, in San Francisco and some other cities in Colorado, they're allowing on-site consumption of edibles and smoking. Okay. And then I remembered my question for you all, which is concentrate, what Mr. Constant mentioned, is that the same thing as what goes in the vaping stuff? So the proposal here is not to allow vaping at all. It's just to allow smoking,
just flower,
buds, or flower, or whatever.
Pre-rolls, right.
Okay, yeah, interesting. And so why is that? Why is it the potential health impacts from vaping, and someone else from the industry I think wants to weigh in too?
Actually, if you would stand up and identify yourself.
Yeah, I'm Jake Morton. I was with Canabasca. Basically, with that answer to that question, there is the opportunity, and there are apparatuses that vaporize dry herb flower, and it's a different combustion than actually lighting it on fire. So there's medical devices in Germany that have been around since the 80s. One's called a Volcano, and basically it just passes hot air over the flower and uses convection heat to transfer the THC into basically vapor. And it's a different type of transformation of the THC into our bodies than actual combustion. Does that kind of answer it? But it's different than the concentrate that we have.
I'm just curious why.
But to answer your question about why concentrates are not being included in this on-site consumption regulation, it would be because state law doesn't allow for on-site consumption of concentrate.
Mr. Constant?
Yeah, and the reason why is because these concentrates come to the point of almost 100% pure tetrahydrocannabinol. And that level of volume of percentage taken so quickly can provide massive intoxication really quickly. And so the state decided in their own precautionary way that that was a level of use that wasn't going to be legalized. And so just the flour can be vaporized by use of heat, but not combustion, or can be combusted. You know, when you watch videos of, you know, the former reporter from Channel 2 News taking this massive volume all at once, that's the kind of behavior that the state said that will not be allowed here.
Ms. Stonekey?
I just wanted to make the point that the ASHRAE guidelines have been updated since 2010, most recently, I believe, in 2016. And we are happy to send it to you electronically.
Okay, that would be great. Thanks if you do that. And Ms. Neenan?
I would love a chance to circle back to something that Assemblymember Zalatel brought up earlier in terms of the challenges with people making their own choice about being in a place and smoking together, and the employees. One of the reasons that I'm interested to see how this conversation goes further is after sitting in the Community and Economic Development Committee meeting, there was a lot of conversation about potential things that could happen in Anchorage that go beyond what the statewide smoke-free workplace law would allow. And I want to make sure that everybody has the information on what the history was. There were questions about the definition of a freestanding building. That was discussed at length in the legislative process, and there was actually, at the end of the legislative session when the smoke-free workplace law passed, there was a House floor amendment to remove that language specifically to allow for smoking in strip malls. That was defeated. There's legislative record on that, and I think it would be helpful to this body to know what that more detailed record is that isn't evident in just reading the final product of what's in statute, and I'm happy to help out with that.
Ms. Zalatel?
Yeah, I don't think that's really an issue here in particular, because we're only talking about the potential for on-site consumption in freestanding buildings. I'm part of the CEBC committee, and I think if there's some issues to still be resolved around what constitutes freestanding, and I think that that's going to come from the state level in this regard. I appreciate the history, but I don't think that there's quite a corollary to that.
And Ms. Neven, if you have information that you can email us too about that history or review, that might be helpful for members to review. And 1 second, please, let me check and see. Do members have any questions for our health department? We're about halfway through our time before we turn to public safety. Mr. Weddleton?
2 comments. One is on, how they could set things up so it gets smell around. I think nothing on the planet smells worse than nail polish companies. You go in there and people get their nails. They have one in the Diamond Center, and each little table has a thing, and you can't smell a thing. It used to just knock you over. So there's some interesting technology. But what we have here is just putting it on the ballot. And I just all this other stuff is interesting, but is it relevant if we're just saying put it on the ballot? So, I mean, it's almost like this discussion is for a huge public discussion starting in January, February, where this will go to the ballot. And it says in here, it will honor the smoke-free workplace law. That's it, period, right? So that's a done deal. I mean, if this passes the vote or whatever, I mean, that's it. I mean, they have to. And I think it's a huge burden. I don't know how you do it. I don't think anyone could do it. So it could be voted yes, who would know, but then no one can do it because you can't meet that requirement. So then you're happy, right? I mean, that's kind of your goal, right? And so it's like we're having all these discussions and meetings, but this is just go to the vote and people drive drunk or high or smoke free. It just seems irrelevant to me. Am I missing something here? No, what you're saying is important. Right? What you're saying is important, but for this, it's just should we put it to the ballot for the broader people to decide, and then this information would go out on radio ad nauseum.
Ms. Pineda, or
we are here to answer questions that you guys have related to health impact. So that's why we're.
Yeah, no, I'm not picking. Yeah, I'm just saying, but broadly, does it go to the ballot? Do we decide, or do we let the public decide?
I'll
I'll respond. Obviously, that's your decision to make, but the reason that was put forward for having outside consumption in Anchorage in the first place was that there were people who otherwise couldn't consume a legal product. You've accomplished that by passing edibles.
I think you are,
Mr. Dunbar?
we're not supposed to debate with the public, but I think you're conflating. I don't think edibles and flour are the same product. And I'm not an expert on it, but the people in the industry can tell you it gets you high in a different way. It touches your body in a different way. Yes, it's a similar chemical, but they are quite different. I could elaborate on that.
Okay, well, we have a few folks in the queue, and I know, Mr. Redmond, you had wanted to make a comment earlier.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, while I may not have been referencing the most recent ASHRAE report, if the conclusion they reached in 2010 was that they could safely, based on the engineering and HVAC technology at that point, provide a safe space for an isolated room, I'm confident that 10 years later, almost now, that they would reach the same conclusion.
Okay, and if you could send us a copy to the clerk's office of that report, that'd be helpful. So Ms. Quinn Davidson, and then Mr. Constant, and then I think that unless there are some specific questions here or other outstanding health questions, we should move on to the public safety piece. So Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to ask the question number 2 on here of you guys, since I think the industry could go to experts. What percentage, how would you break down, what people are buying in their shops? Are they mostly edibles? Are they mostly vaping? Are they mostly joints? Are they, I'm just wondering, 10% of the sales you make are flour, and we're making a big deal out of this, but most people aren't smoking anyway. That, to me, changes the conversation. So I'm curious.
From our perspective, most people smoke flour.
Okay.
Yeah, we sell more flour and can't keep pre-rolls in the house.
Okay.
Could that be?
I would say that's very true. I think predominantly, especially at our 4th Avenue store, it probably makes up 60% of our sales. At our other store, it's less. We see more edibles and more concentrate sales. But still, I think sort of in the current market, I think flour is king. And so.
We've got Mr. Constant in the queue. Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just follow.
Okay.
Why would someone purchase flour rather than edible?
It's cheaper.
It's completely different. There's lots of reasons, but it's completely different experience is the best way I can describe it.
Ms. Davidson, it looks like Mr. Warden would like to comment on your question.
Great. Yeah, I want to hear another one.
I can answer kind of both of those, Jake Warden. So I found BDS Analytics is one of the big analytics companies that's doing cannabis research in the lower 48. And they researched Colorado in 2018, and it said that consumers bought enough ingestibles in December to harness 14% of the market, up 2% to 12% in 2017. So 14% of Colorado is ingestible cannabis. And that's
edibles.
Edibles, right. The second part of that is that the cannabis is actually metabolized differently within your body when it's an edible versus when it's inhaled, right? So when it's inhaled, it goes through your bronchioles into your bloodstream directly. When it's ingested, it has to go through your liver and process that way, and that's slower, more of a body feeling than a euphoric kind of high. So it's, totally different experience.
Ms. Davidson, did you have any more questions or anything for the health department?
No, I think we could move on. I want to make sure there's time.
Mr. Constant?
Yeah, and just in response to Mr. Wellington's question about, isn't this just about sending it to the ballot? It is, and every single step of the way, we will hear the same arguments in depth every time, all the way through every step, because that's their job. They pay to do this. And there are some very strong advocates in the community who have made it crystal clear back at the ballot initiative and at the regulatory process and now at the question of edibles, inhalation, and if the voters approve it, then the fight will be over the smoking piece and we'll hear the same arguments, and then after that it'll be license by license until the voters say yes, the field is won. But it may or may not be. Of course, we don't know where we're going, but we're going to hear this conversation as long as we're around until another generation comes along and this work is done. So that's, I think, the answer to your question.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Do any members have questions? I would ask Ms. Pineda and Mr. Hickman if there are any, since we're here to view this ordinance from a health perspective and to consider the health implications of this ordinance, is there anything else or any other aspects you think we ought to consider before we move into deliberation? I don't know, is this on Tuesday, October 4th? October 8th? October 8th. Is there anything else you think that we ought to consider from a health perspective?
Well, the only thing I really have is keeping the employees out of the smoking room while smoking is occurring. I don't see how that's not a difficult thing to do. I mean, I was at a conference last week, and I had to go find a different bathroom because they had closed it so they could clean it in the middle of the conference. So it's not impossible to temporarily close the room for 10 or 15 minutes to go in there and empty the trash or do whatever you got to do to maintain or service that area when people aren't actively smoking. So I don't know that would be a huge problem at all. I mean, we deal with it every day when you go to the store. They close the bathroom to clean it. So just one example. So and the part about emergencies, if we need to, we can add something about in the case of emergency. But then we'll have to define what an emergency is. So an emergency isn't the trash cans overflowing. That's an emergency. Get in there. So we'd have to define what emergency is.
We should plan on at least 6 months to define what an emergency is.
Yeah, so I we would look at an emergency as if there was an emergency, then take care of the emergency. But I don't think we need to put that in the code. So we have to then ratchet it down to a specific definition of an emergency. Our people are never going to go in and say, somebody had a heart attack, you can't go in there. So, or we're going to write you a ticket. It's just not going to happen. So.
I think for us, we'll see what the version is, the changed version, and be able to comment on it.
And Ms. Honest, question or comment?
I was just going to add to that, one thing to consider, and this comes from state requirements, they're not allowed to leave abandoned product. They have to go in and take care of it immediately. So something to consider with this is the fact that they will have to go in potentially while people are smoking to take product that has been abandoned. They can take it with them, but if patrons choose to abandon it, they have to within a certain time frame.
Okay. And Mr. Thompson would like to
The
respond.
answer to that is you can't presume that they would have to go, and there could be such a thing as a rule to be participating in this location. If you do that, you will not be allowed back in, and people will comply. And so it just, you got to set up a culture, whatever the culture is, those rules are, they will comply with those rules. I go to one restaurant, they don't pick up your dishes, and so there's never a table to sit down on, and still they won't put out a bucket. I go to another restaurant, there's a bucket, everyone will put their dishes in the bucket. And so almost 99% of the time, it's a cultural matter that can be defined by the operation as long as the rules are in place to say, we can do this, not that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Thank you for raising that point, Ms. Honest. Ms. Zelato.
I would really appreciate the places you found that off-site smoking consumption is happening. If we could just kind of get where we can find those regulations, that would be really helpful. Yeah, take a look. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all for being here, and also we look forward to receiving additional information from both Ms. Stoneking and Ms. Neiman, and then recommendations from Ms. Pineda and Ms. Host as well. Okay. To the co-chairs of the Public Safety Committee, did you have any thoughts on how you wanted to handle this part?
No, it's still you.
Okay.
Go ahead. Ms. LaFrance, you're doing a great job.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Actually, if we could have the representatives from our public safety departments come forward. And thank you to members of the industry for coming up here as part of the conversation. Thank you all for being here. And if you would just identify yourself again for the record. It's Jody Hedrick, Anchorage Fire.
Mike Curl, Anchorage Police Department. Steve Dunn, Anchorage Police Department.
Do members have any questions?
Well, go ahead.
Ms. Zelato?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Is there any concern about on-site consumption with smoking that you have that's more specific to smoking versus when we discussed it for edibles? Is there any public safety concern differences?
I think the difference is that we have some of the same concerns. And so for alcohol, the servers are required to attend mandatory server and seller training. And that's so they're able to sell and serve alcohol responsibly, legally, and safely. You guys call them bud tenders, is that what they're called? So the bud tenders, what kind of training are they going to be required to do to mitigate the risk to public safety to identify signs of impairment? The signs of impairment are not the same with marijuana as they are with alcohol. And that's why I have my expert here who will elaborate on that. So those are our biggest concerns, is the fact that they're going to be, well, edibles is already passed, but they're going to be smoking marijuana, and then we need to make sure that they're not impaired before they leave. So based on that, Steve's going to give you his expertise. He's one of our fatality accident investigators.
Before we go there, I would just add that the state AMCO is requiring the handler training to have an endorsement for consumption of marijuana. And so they actually do have specific training related to that is in development still, because this is an emerging field, but it is different than exam training, and it's as specific. So that does exist.
Just listening to how this is going to be set up, if they're not allowed to go in the room, these people are consuming, how are they going to recognize signs of impairment? When they come out, if they're impaired, what are they going to do?
I know
that's a big concern.
It's not a debate back and forth, but I would stand on the fact that APD has a really sharp, capable team of people who are easily able to identify people who are intoxicated and unsafe, even without having to provide a chemical test or some other variable. And so you are evidence that, in fact, it is possible to determine someone is intoxicated without having, being right where they are when they're inhaling or
I understand, but what are they going to do when they recognize them as they're leaving this room and they recognize they're impaired?
Right.
When they should have actually stopped them from consuming prior to reaching that point? What are they going to do? Because then that person's going to leave and get in the vehicle, and then he's going to be a statistic after that.
Well,
so that's where the difference.
And I think the argument there is put them in an Uber. And we have cabs that bars send people home in all the time. When they do find someone who inadvertently makes it through their system and they're super intoxicated, we have a really incredible system developed, and APD is the pinnacle of it.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. So we have a couple more folks in the queue, and I know that there's information you want to get to. Ms. Quinn Davidson, did you want to speak now? Okay. And then Mr. Dunbar, did you have something on this?
Yeah, I had a question. Something you said there really piqued my interest. I'm always sort of fascinated when I learn the rules around alcohol. So I understand that you're not supposed to overserve someone once they're already intoxicated. You're not supposed to intoxicate them more. But it sounded like what you just said is the establishments shouldn't let them leave intoxicated. Is that true?
Oh, no. They cannot stop them from leaving.
Right. So, I mean, that's kind of my point, because if it's against the rules to allow drunk people to leave the bars, then then our Fourth Avenue is kind of an interesting rule-breaking place.
What I was trying to say is the bartenders, when they see that somebody is becoming impaired, they will stop serving them.
Right.
So if we have that separation through glass or whatever, they won't be able to do that.
Well, so I guess it's a little bit like if you were to give someone, so at a bar you're being served many times, right? Mm-hmm. Often over the course of a night, or at least several times. In this case, we're sort of like giving you a rather large drink and then requiring you to consume it on your own at your own pace, right? But there are requirements that we can't serve more than, I think it's 1 gram, or what's the 1 gram?
1 gram.
Something like that. So does that alleviate your concerns at all, that there are pretty tight restrictions on how much substance they can be given?
Well, just down here at 4th Avenue, they can start at one place, consume, go to the next one, consume.
But in that case, so you're worried that the employees won't be able to interact with them because they're in the room. But if they go from one place to another, when they get into that new place and try to purchase this stuff, they will be interacting with an employee, right? And as Chris said, that'll be a trained employee that hopefully will be able to tell, oh man, you are already intoxicated. You are not going to get more product.
Hopefully.
Well, I've seen them refuse service.
So, Mr. Dunbar, did you have anything else for that question?
No, I mean, I think that's a really interesting discussion. I think the point you raise is a good one, that there is, it's sort of these conflicting values, right? We want to keep the employees separate from them because of the legitimate concerns about secondhand smoke. On the other hand, that does create some issues versus alcohol, where they won't be able to have that constant contact to see how intoxicated they are. Although I would posit to you that on a busy Friday night in many bars, it is also the case that
Or their buddy-
patrons are doing things.
Or their buddy
and-
buys them
Right,
drinks.
and they can't keep a really close hold on them. And then the sort of safety net from that is we have a bunch of other rules and laws when they leave the
But we have Title IV
establishment.
that deals with that, so I assume Title IV will be adjusted to include marijuana as well.
I'm sorry, could you explain what Title IV
That's
does?
the alcohol, basically the alcohol laws, which deal with serving minors alcohol. Just Title IV deals with all the laws involving alcohol.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's going to happen. Mr. Gates might have been able to speak to that, but
So,
yeah.
let me just go back to the queue here. Austin, I still have to know, are you, okay? And I have Mr. Peterson and then Mr. Weddleton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to point out the fact that this ordinance limits it to 1 gram. So,
Chief Hedrick?
To follow up with Ms. Salatel's question, which is in regard to what other things we are concerned about. As the fire department, we are always concerned about any open ignition sources. So where there's smoke, not to use a pun, but there is fire, we definitely have concerns. There is a very long list of fires, fatalities in commercial establishments caused by people inappropriately discarding their smoking materials. That's one of the leading causes of fire deaths in Alaska. So when it comes down to, this gives us another opportunity for that situation to occur. If these areas are sprinklered, that at least we would prevent that fire from spreading to other areas. But that would be something that we would be concerned about, is how do we ensure that someone, as they become intoxicated, doesn't inappropriately discard whatever they're smoking with and cause a fire. I agree that probability is probably low, but we have to consider everything as we look at this ordinance.
Thank you, Chief Hedrick. Ms. Zalatel, did you want to
Just a quick
respond?
follow-up. Do you have the same concerns if it was outdoor only?
Yes, because
Okay.
wildland fire, if they, anytime that there's any ignition source, we saw exactly with the MLK, with how dry we were from the MLK fire through the whole summer. Inappropriately discarded cigarettes, no matter what type of product is being smoked, they can cause fires. So even in an outdoor space that's open, maybe a fenced-in area, if there's trash cans, if there's anything, people can potentially disregard their cigarettes improperly.
I mean, one last one. So would it be your preference if you had to choose one, and I know you don't want to choose one, something with sprinklers or not sprinklers, like outdoor or indoor? Would do sprinklers help mitigate the concerns you have in a way that we can't do that outdoors?
Yes, but we could sprinkler outdoor as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I'm a sprinkler, we should be sprinklering everything, then that's,
Okay.
rather
Thank
have
you.
wet people than burn people.
Thank you, Chief Hedrick. So we have Mr. Weddleton, then Mr. Constant, and then Mr. Dunbar.
They're not just wet, the stuff in those things is disgusting. Yeah. So, we really just, regarding on-site consumption, smoking, we have 3 things. We could do nothing. We could decide just normally how we decide, we vote amongst the 11 of us, or we could put it on the ballot. And that's really a decision in front of us. I mean, sprinkling and all that stuff would have to come after, way after we make some decision. What's your favorite? Ranked choice voting. Do nothing, allow it on our own without going to vote, or send it to the ballot.
So I had an interesting conversation this morning about control. And that's one of the things when you work in the public arena, that we don't have control over those kind of things. But if you're giving me the choice.
Ranked choice, you can rank the 3.
Ranked choice.
Very hip.
I'm trying to think the best way to answer this question. I think it would be appropriate to give it to the public. I
So
think
put it on the
that would, to put it on the ballot and let people decide what they want to do. We worked for them. It should be their decision.
Mike, you got a opinion?
Whatever would mitigate the risk to public safety the most. That's what we would. That's a good political
That's
answer.
not it. That's not ranked choice.
That was one of the choices.
Thank you.
And did you want to weigh in on that, sir?
Not on that, but actually I have weigh in on a few things. First of all, I know we visited the cannabis consumption, and we talked about the delayed response as far as it goes through the digestive system before it gets in your system. Now we're giving them the opportunity to inhale it, so this is immediate effect on the body. And I know that the industry I talked about as far as like smoking versus vaping versus edibles. THC is THC. Okay, how you get your body is a variety of whether it be vaping or whether smoking or edible. Your body breaks down THC, and the molecules attached to the CB1, CB2 receptor sites in your brain. It doesn't matter how it gets to your system; it's going to get there eventually. Once it gets there, it's going to attach and it's going to produce the effect, the impairment effects. And by allowing them to smoke, the effect is immediate. And I know that Mr. Constant, you're full support as far as how great we are. I love that. I agree with you. But I wish we had another 500 officers that stop the other 5 that gets away after we stop the one. And in my position as a fatality investigator, and I can tell you that THC is becoming more and more predominant, and I expressed that during the last session with edibles. And I wish I could show you some of the traffic camera videos that we have of cases where folks are misjudging the time and distance, turning in front of a dump truck at 10 miles per hour, severely injuring a passenger, or turning in front of a motorcycle because they thought it was further away. Time and distance impairment is huge. Public safety is huge when folks consume THC. And now we're giving them the opportunity to consume it and get into the system quickly, and then they get behind the wheel. How are they getting to these places? They drive there. How are they going to leave these places? They drive away. So it's going to be a huge public safety issue for us. And I mean, we can sit here and talk about it, but the folks that we need to talk to are the folks that have lost family members because of that. And it's huge because we don't feel the same, we don't have the drive that they have, but as a law enforcement officer investigating these type of death, it's huge. It absolutely is huge. So, and I guess the other thing that I want to mention also, as far as training the bud tenders, we know for years, as far as we have a vivid picture of a alcohol drunk. I mean, it's pretty classic. They slur speech. The gait is, the dexterity, the balance is poor. We know that through lots and lots of studies. But THC, the fatalities that we've had, is cognitive impairment is what we have to look at. And cognitive impairment, how would you engage that at a smoking facility? Do we give them a puzzle and see how they put the puzzle together, or how do we engage them? It's very hard to do that. And oftentimes not, we gauge that when they crash into something or kill somebody. So it's again, it's a huge safety concern. And how we train these bud tenders, that's going to be really difficult.
Thank you. And we have Mr. Constant and Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Reddleton, did you have any follow-up?
Briefly, I would have asked you to rank choice too. I just didn't want you to get in trouble. But you're welcome to rank choice. Do we do nothing? Just do it on our own, or send it to the ballot?
I would support do it on your own and do it right, and really consider the safety of the city of Anchorage when you do make that decision.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Constant and then Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions now since you made your comments, and you just said, and I think this maybe was just a turn of phrase, that when you find people who are intoxicated with marijuana, more often than not, it's at a scene of a fatal accident. I don't think you really mean that, right?
No, it might also, my expertise as a drug recognition expert, I get called situations where folks have been arrested for DUI and they have either no alcohol or little alcohol and drugs and medication on board. And I can tell you that I've done many evaluations on THC impaired folks, and those folks, in some cases or most cases, are just as impaired or more impaired than alcohol drugs. And there's lots of studies out there. I can't emphasize enough. A lot of studies out there that a little bit of alcohol, a little bit of marijuana is severely impairing. And we have that. It's available. Alcohol, where people, they smoke marijuana, then they go have a drink. And that kind of goes hand in hand.
For some, right. And so, so I just wanted to make sure that, because I understand you got far more people doing stupid things than doing horribly fatal things. Because fatalities are bad, but they're not the most common scenario we have. So that's good. I just want to make sure that we were clear on that. And I would offer that even though what you stated about how the fact is you just have THC in your body, the benefit of the quick onset is the quick offset, right? There's a difference about how quickly and not quickly the cannabis affects you. When you eat it, it could last for 8 hours. You know, when you smoke it, it just will never last that long. So, and Ms. Hedrick, I have one question for you. I respect your team's efforts to sprinkler everything. I don't have sprinklers in my house yet, but one day you'll probably be there and tell me I have to. And the reason you're doing that is because there's a code, right? It's practical experience in the fact that there's a code. And so any of the environments that, should this get passed, are created would have to meet the building codes, the safety codes, the international and federal, I don't know what the fire codes are, right? But they would have to meet those standards, correct?
Yes, the current standards.
Right.
Yes, they would have to met them.
Yeah, so ultimately we can structurally mitigate the concern of somebody doing something stupid, either whether it's the requirement of sprinklers or some other methodologies. I personally am not a fan of the big cans where you stick the butts in, because I've seen them on fire a number of times myself. And so, right, so
Yes,
building
yes.
codes okay.
Building codes can mitigate it. Unfortunately, when someone moves into a facility that was built before codes required sprinklers, if they're not making major modifications, and I'm not 100% sure, of course, because I'm not the fire marshal, but so I would have to double check to see if if we have any mechanism of requiring them, if they're not changing the actual use of the facility. Say you take a restaurant that was built before the codes required sprinklers, and now they're going to use it for a similar thing, if we could require it to be sprinklered at that time.
And I can offer anyone in the cannabis industry could tell you when you open up one of these buildings, you have a mandatory change of use, and you must bring that building up to code. And I don't know if that will hold true going from license to endorsed. So there's maybe the narrow band that it might squeeze through, but in this case, every building they've gone into, they've had to bring all the way up.
Thank you, Mr. Hodgson. We have about 15 minutes left. We have 3 people in the queue, Mr. Dunbar, Ms. Kennedy, and Ms. Quinn Davidson. Could I get a show of hands as to people here who are planning to testify or want to speak? 1, 2 people want to speak? Okay, so we'll make sure to leave a few minutes. Okay, thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, I have 3 quick questions, I hope. The first is, the sprinkler question I think is really interesting. And I want to ask people in the industry, do any of you own facilities that are sprinklered? And are there any, are you aware of any marijuana retail establishments that are sprinklered?
If you would stand up and identify yourself, please.
John Redden, Great Northern Cannabis. We have 2 operating facilities and 1 facility we're in the process of building out. The 2 that are operational did not have sprinklers when we purchased the building, and we're not required to put sprinklers in, so we did not. The current facility that we have that we're building out had existing sprinklers, and we've decided to keep them for insurance and other purposes, but just safety purposes. So some have them, some don't.
Do you guys have sprinklers?
I think Canabasca has sprinklers, yeah.
Okay.
Pretty sure.
So it's an interesting question. Some of them do, some of them don't. Chief, just following up on that, you talked about discarded smoking cigarettes mostly, probably some blunts or whatever too, mostly cigarettes, causing these fires. But I would imagine those are mostly residential. I mean, my area, there are these trailers, for example. We've had a number of trailer fires. And so, in a weird way, wouldn't it be safer to be smoking in this area where you're monitored versus smoking at home or smoking in the woods where these things have caused fire? I mean, if you're in a commercial establishment, isn't the case where you would have somebody there monitoring you and maybe we wouldn't have so many discarded smoking fires.
You are correct up to a point. One of the reasons why we have sprinklers in those types of situations is because they kill lots of people, from
Sure.
workers or visitors to the business. And unfortunately, in Alaska, we focus much more in the social environment, the business environment for sprinklers.
Yeah.
We do not have residential sprinklers. So absolutely, I agree. If back to I said I would sprinkler everything, because that's the only way to where we can really ensure that people aren't going to die from fires. If we have residential sprinklers, the majority of our fatalities in Alaska at this time are residential. Same thing across the nation, they are residential. That's because we do not have a good history and code requirements for residential sprinklers. So you are correct, it would be safer for them to smoke in an environment that is sprinklered, but as you heard, not all of them would be.
The last question for you. So Bernie's Bungalow right now has smoking on site. They have with these hot coals. They do the hookahs.
Mm-hmm.
How has that been handled by your department?
I'm not sure. I'd have to check and see how that was approved.
Okay. And then last quick question for you. So it sounded like you were saying that you were describing the challenge about how you see someone, they're drunk, we know they're drunk. But it's much more difficult for marijuana. But before marijuana was legal, I mean, first of all, you need probable cause to pull them over because they're swerving or what have you. But are you saying that we don't have any functioning field test for being high for marijuana?
Not for a bud tender. For a police officer, they go through a week and a half training as far as field sobriety tests, how to administer them, and what to look for as far as impairment.
Okay.
But something like that, we can't feasibly teach a bud tender because it's a 2-week class. So it makes it very, very difficult. There's not a specific test, short of doing a saliva test to see how much THC. It's going to be very hard to teach a bud tender to recognize the physical impairment. For us as a police officer, when we're going through the field sobriety test, that's what it's gauged for, is to look for impairment. But for them, it's going to be hard because cognitive impairment is major for marijuana consumption, and then followed by the outward physical signs of impairment.
And just to add on to what you're saying,
thank you.
To clarify even more, our patrol officers, they go through the initial training, they can recognize that they're impaired, but then we bring in a drug recognition expert who goes through another 2 weeks of extensive training to look for different signs of impairment that are associated with drugs. Not only marijuana, but also all the other drugs as well. So that's an additional 2 weeks on top of what the basic patrol officer would go through.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffler. Ms. Kennedy and then Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions are kind of a little more of the legal side of actually putting this on the ballot, so I don't want to necessarily shift off the topic with APD and AFD here, but if you want me to go ahead with that, and I don't even know if anybody here can answer any of that. Okay, all right.
Yeah, ask your questions, and if they can't, we'll take it up after.
Okay, all right. Well, one of my questions is that if this ordinance goes on the ballot and if it's passed, is the assembly restricted in any way from revising any of the code for any specific amount of time? Because a lot of things, once something goes on the ballot, gets approved, you've got like a couple of years where you're not allowed to touch any of it. So my concern is over whether or not we have the capability to revise any of it, even if it gets approved as it's being submitted by the voters.
I sort of anticipated this question, so I was just looking for a section of the code. And it's not the one. Because basically the answer is,
Would you introduce yourself?
Todd Sherwood, Municipal Legal Office. There's, when it comes to initiative and referendum, it says in our charter that for a period of 2 years, basically they can't, the Assembly cannot make any substantive changes. They can't repeal something that has been passed by initiative. And if something's been repealed, so here it is. Yes, so the Assembly may not repeal or substantially alter an ordinance enacted by initiative or enacted well, anyway, that's basically it. So it's that 2-year period, and I think that's what you're asking about. However, that being said, as this is written, this is not an initiative and it's not a referendum, because an initiative is defined under AMC 2.50.010. It says initiative, except where context suggests a different meaning, means the process of enacting a measure by the vote of the people without assembly action. So here there's assembly action, then it goes for a vote of the people. So that would be the answer. If this passes and goes through the process as it's written now, there wouldn't be anything that would prevent the Assembly from making some amendments to what just passed 2 weeks after certification.
Okay, so we can still do fine tuning. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. So we're running short on time here. Ms. Quinn Davidson and then Mr. Dunbar, and then I want to go to public testimony.
Okay. Couple questions, Ms. Hetrick. Could we require that, I mean, if there's high risk of buildings that have smoke in them, could we require that should I guess what are the rules now, but could we require that establishments that want to have smoking inside be sprinklered? I mean, I assume we just have it through our code, and so we would do that after passing this or as part of it, or what? Anyway, that's something to
Yes, absolutely.
think about. Okay, and then does the state allow us to let people smoke pot outside? So we could do that.
As long as it's private.
As long as,
It's private.
what do you mean, the place, privately owned? So the state doesn't allow us to have people walking around smoking a joint? Okay, and so that leads me to my question number 7, which is, can we get a copy of the ballot initiative language? Because I think we're constantly referring back to like, oh, well, the people wanted X, but I haven't even seen that, so I would love.
And I can comment on that
Okay.
if you'd like. I saw question number 7. So there was the ballot initiative, which was a law. Boom, it's state law. My recollection and from what we've found so far is there's nothing in that about on-site consumption.
Okay.
And then the legislature, and it's Title 17.38, that's where the state law is, they added a few things, but not much, to the ballot initiative language that became law. I think I found one vague reference to consumption, and it had to do with how you measured square feet in state law. All of this about on-site consumption exists in state regulation, which was passed by the Marijuana Control Board, who apparently believed they had sufficient authority because state law has a provision in Title 17.38 that says rulemaking can be done by the State Marijuana Control Board. And they believed they had enough authority to take this next step. So the short answer to your question is you're not going to know what the people thought about, the state thought about on-site consumption based on the ballot initiative back in 2015. But I will send links to all these things, to the original ballot proposition, to state law and state regulations, and send it to the clerk's office and have it sent out to you folks.
Can I just make a follow-up? So that's really helpful. I've heard said many times, oh, the voters did a smoke-free ban, but then they said they wanted on-site consumption. So how are we to know what they want? And people are saying that and stuff. That's not actually.
So, the original ballot proposition specifically included no public consumption of marijuana. And I think where this is headed is that if it's on-site, it's not public.
Okay.
I think that's, what people are thinking. But they talk about in a business, so you've got to make an exception within the fact that you can't normally allow it in a business where the public goes.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. And you'll send us all the language and
yes.
sort of help interpret. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davidson. Thank you, Mr. Sherwood. We're just about out of time. Mr. Dunbar, okay, so let's go to public testimony. If you come up and identify yourself.
So Mark Butler, you've heard me Mark Butler. You've heard me talk on this issue before. There's two issues here today. As my understanding is public safety, a group of the Assembly Committee, and public health. I was a member of the city health department. I was the public information officer when this law passed, and Trainee and Coffey, both Assembly members, distinguished former Assembly members, passed this. And we advocated for public health. I don't think there's any way that you can honestly say that the secondhand smoke isn't going to be present, opening doors, things like that. Secondly, I choose number one, which was do nothing. Stop this. Second is you could take it to the vote. 72.39% of the people voted to keep the Clean Air Act. This would change the Clean Air Act for marijuana, and then would move to potentially, what about cigar shops? What about cigarette smoking in bars and so forth? It would open the gate. 72.9. I don't think anybody here has been elected a public official that had a competition has this much. Secondly, I was on the Public Safety Advisory Commission, and I don't think anyone in the public safety world would say this is good to promote public safety. There's going to be someone that dies from this. And so is one person a year okay? Is 2 persons, 3 persons? What are we talking about? So I think 0 dying from consuming like this and then driving home is the best way to go. So I hope that 1 will happen. I think 2, I think 72%, 44,000 Anchoragites voted to keep this, and I don't think that'll change. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Hi, I'm Kenny Peterson, P-E-T-E-R-S-E-N, and I don't envy what you guys have to do, so thanks for doing it. Thanks for representing us and have to ask all these questions and to figure all these things out for it. I've lived in Alaska all my life, and I can't say that Anchorage is better than it was before we passed marijuana a few years ago. As far as a community, maybe there's more freedoms or something, but it's affected me as an employer. I say that before on the record, as far as that I've had to let people go because they smoke marijuana and I can't let them drive our vehicles to go around, but that's not what this case is about, or this point is about. The main thing I'm questioning is a couple things is, who are we doing this for? There's people that don't have homes. That's who we're doing it. We're doing it for visitors who's coming from out of state, and so we want to make sure that we're a destination for smoking. Where, who's going to benefit from this, and is it worth all the risks? My second question is, as a result of what we're doing, will public safety be higher, the same, or less? As I understand, it'll be less. The second question, will public health be better because we're doing this, the same, or less? As I understand it, there's a risk that it's likely to be less. And so as a result of passing this, both public safety and public health sound like they're likely to be both going down. That's one point. The second point is that when marijuana passed, I believe that it was due to a misunderstanding of the initiative. The question was posed, should we regulate marijuana like we do alcohol? Well, of course we want to, anyone who's against marijuana says, yes, absolutely, we want to regulate it, we want to control it, we want to keep it out. But what that essentially did was approve it. So I believe that the initiative process was not useful in passing marijuana originally for it. And so I think I vote number 1 or something that says, you are the smarter folks here, you've been asking these questions, we're not going to have, the public's not going to be able to go in and ask the police department and so on generally that questions. I think we've elected you guys to be like the electoral, the knowledgeable ones who research it out. So I believe that you guys should do the vote, and that you guys should be the ones who decline it, it's my vote, because of lower public safety, public health, instead of taking to a ballot that could just be manipulated by marketing and so on for it. I do, however, I had heard Ken Abaska mention about the medical marijuana and so on. I do support medical marijuana in proper dosage by pharmacy, and that's very appropriate for it. But as far as outside of that, I believe that it would not be beneficial to our community. So, thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Do members have any questions? Mr. Butler? And then Mr. Rivera?
I do a question for Don or someone. I thought that if you had like a cigar shop, you can smoke in there. Isn't that an exception?
I don't know. I would have to look.
Okay, and then,
No, you can't.
Okay, there's nowhere.
Cigar shop, no.
Okay.
If you can properly set up a club, a nonprofit club with no employees and all that, it is possible to have smoking somewhere. And I think there might be one of those places that is probably.
John, there's one in
set
Acres
up.
meets the definition of second-hand smoking ordinance that is in fact in operation now.
Okay, that might be what I was thinking. And then can I follow up just real?
And we have written citations for that before, and it's been upheld. So
Chuku Charlie's has a smoking area outside. Is that so?
there's lots of places that have that, and there are
That's okay.
rules that the building department has for how to construct an outdoor smoking place. So it can be semi-enclosed, and I forget the percentage, but it has to be a certain percentage open to the outside air. ConocoPhillips is probably the most enclosed one you'll see. I mean, in fact, you could walk past it and wouldn't know you walked past it unless you smelled it. So, but there's lots of the outdoor ones that are approved through building department, and that was a quite a process when we first tried to figure out how to make those work outside and not have people freeze to death. So.
Okay. And
Thanks.
actually, I hate to cut you off.
No, fine, I'm done. Remember
But
what?
we're out of time, and Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So just wanted to talk process really quick. So this is coming up before us on October 8th. I did have the clerk schedule an additional work session just in case we needed it. I want to pose it to the group to see if you feel there is the need to do an additional work session. And to address Mr. Weddleton's question earlier, I think our job is to vet whether this is a sound question to send to the voters, and I think this process we have done so. So when I just generally pose it to the body, should we have a work session? Is it needed, or do we feel like we have vetted this enough to vote on it on October 8th?
I think that if Mr. Gates has amendments, if there's a substitute version, if there is work in progress that's coming up with alternative conversations, that those items, as best we can, should be brought forward, and we should sit around a table and talk about them in advance of.
That sounds sound to me. So discuss any changes at that final work session, but we don't need to really do any more of the vetting kind of questions that we've been doing today. Yeah, Mr.
Well, I think it depends. I don't know if we can do it, but can we? Who's doing this version, and what are the features of it?
I am. So again, I took like through the chair, the original kind of session we had. There were some amendments proposed there, and I brought them to him. He was supposed to turn them into an S. And I've taken some other notes here about employees being in the room while they're smoking. I don't think I'll put the sprinkler thing in this version. I think that might be more appropriate for something in a later version. I mean, like if it were to pass, but if someone wanted to bring an amendment, we can do that. But so I guess the short answer is I'm going to work with Dean, hope to have an S version, and then present it to you guys by that work session. I think the limiting factor is Dean, but because we have until October 8th, I think there's enough time. So the work session was on October 4th or something like that?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think I should have an S version by that.
Just to so you would be looking at changes of the code that's presented here, the ballot language itself.
The ballot language, there were some small changes. I think I took out the word freestanding because it seemed to be confusing people. And again, I mean, as Mr. Sherwood said, the ballot language kind of, because of the nature of what we're bringing forward, we can change this if we realize that there's something that needs to be revised. We can do that work. And so my goal with the ballot language is to present enough information that people can make an informed decision.
I was just going to say, I think we spent a good amount of time talking about public safety and talking about public health and talking about sort of the concept and philosophy and what happened at the state level. But I haven't really spent a ton of time digging into the language, so I would really appreciate the opportunity to have that work session be a lot about the technical part and some of even looking at the substitute version, hearing from Dean, brainstorming if we need amendments, that kind of thing.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Rivera? Good. Okay. Thank you all for coming. Very adjourned.